Welcome to another episode of Indaba, the African Debate. My name is Mdudu Brian, and thank you very much for joining me today. I've got a guest with me today, as always, and today we're discussing something slightly different from the norm. Let's dive in.
Thank you so much for having me, Brian. My name is Derek Nseko. I'm a Ugandan-born aviation professional, currently based in South Africa. I am the founder of Airspace Africa, which is a media platform that's dedicated to the African aviation industry. I'm also the founder of a social enterprise called iFly. iFly Academy is dedicated to bringing through the next generation of aviation professionals. So my work spans across the entire aviation industry. I'm originally a pilot by profession, and I'm doing a lot of work as well on my part in the media space. I contribute to various platforms, both in written and broadcast, especially UNBC Africa and others. I write for various publications. I have columns in various newspapers and magazines. But my life is generally all about aviation industry, and in Africa specifically.
Yeah. Oh, brilliant. Thank you very much, Derek, for joining us today. So your sort of company that you run, which is Airspace Africa, can you tell us a little bit more about Airspace Africa? What's the inspiration behind it? And what exactly are you doing when it comes to Airspace Africa?
Yeah, so Airspace Africa is kind of my baby right now because it's still a very young project. And it is the product of work that I've been doing in the media space for a while now. I've been doing a lot of writing. During COVID, I co-authored a book to help guide our industry out of the crisis as well. And I found myself writing for so many aviation publications and speaking to various media outlets. But my main concern when it comes to media, especially in Africa, is that we have such a huge information gap. And I feel like we do not have enough aviation media, and especially the media that can help shape the African aviation story, to help shape the narrative around African aviation. And most of the time, we look outside of Africa to pick up on information about the African aviation industry. We look outside of Africa to get opinion on events that are happening in the African aviation industry. So for me, that is part of my motivation when it comes to starting Airspace Africa, is to help bring that narrative into our hands as African people, to shape our narrative around African aviation, and to help take African aviation stories to more people in Africa, and to educate the African masses about aviation and its importance to Africa. So that's really what African Airspace is about. And another thing that is really important to me with African Airspace is to help empower the next generation of content creators in African aviation. That is something I'm very passionate about, young people, and I really want to use my platform to empower those who are in the content creation space, people who are writers, people who are in the audio-visual space, but they're passionate about aviation. We tend to always think that aviation is just about flying, it's just about the pilot. But it's a very wide industry, and there's a huge spectrum of opportunities that this industry provides. And that is just an aspect of the industry in terms of, from the perspective of someone who's passionate about the African aviation industry. That is an angle to exploit as well. And African Airspace is open to the young people in Africa to come and exploit their passion as well from a content creation perspective.
Brilliant.
Right.
Now, you speak of a huge gap between within the aviation space when it comes to knowledge about aviation within the continent. So what inspired a young man from Uganda growing up? What inspired him to say, you know what, I'll get some wings, I will fly as high as I can? What inspired you to get on the journey to being a pilot and eventually being so passionate about airspace and aviation?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. And like most people, obviously, the aviation as a dream really goes way back to childhood. Mine goes back to actually not even my early childhood, but more of my middle childhood, because, and this is one of the main issues around aviation. It's one of the reasons why I'm pushing aviation awareness with my iFly program. Is that young people, you cannot dream about something that you don't know about. You can't dream about something if you don't have the knowledge about it, if you're not exposed to it. So growing up, I wasn't exposed to the aviation industry. I did not know that I could even become a pilot. If you're not able to see people like you in such a career position and playing such a role in life, you cannot start to dream about it. So it was really until much later in my middle childhood and especially high school when I started picking up on knowledge. I was a bit of a geeky guy, and I was a very voracious reader, so I found myself reading a lot, and I grew a passion for the heavens, and not just aviation. It was astronomy for me. I wanted to be an astronaut. I wanted to go to space. I still want to go to space right now, Brian. And it's still a dream that I have, but it's through the evolution of that very dream as well that I discovered the aviation industry. And it was just through my own journey of education, my self-education and self-discovery, that I discovered this aviation space and I started dreaming about it. And I did not know that it was possible to achieve it, because I did not think that it was possible for me to afford it. That is really one of the main challenges that we have in terms of developing human capital in the aviation space in Africa. It's extremely expensive. But I found my way, I crafted my way, and especially with the support of my parents, who made some huge sacrifices to get me an education to aviation. And it started in Uganda, first of all, where there was a flight school there that I attended. And eventually I moved on to South Africa, where I completed my studies and I became a pilot. But it's not an easy journey for an African man to get into the cockpit.
Now, as always, guys, what I'll do is I'll post down all the links to the projects that Derek is involved in the description box. And for those that are on Spotify, we will mention them later on as well, so that you can have a look and see all the work that Derek is doing. One thing there that you mentioned there, Derek, was support from your parents. How do we convince African parents to say, listen, guys, aviation, being a pilot, being involved, with airlines is a career path that young boys and girls can take within when they're deciding their career paths. How do you convince them? Actually, how do you bring that information to them and say, listen, this is a path that your daughter or your son can take?
Yeah, and you know what, I face this challenge myself, trying to sell this career and put that across as well. It was a challenge for me as well. And you have to understand that parents of us in this generation that I'm in, they come from the old school, and they subscribe to the conventional careers that exist. The titles that we see around, engineer, doctor, or lawyer, or it's one of those conventional things. So it's extremely difficult. I would like to think that the new parents of this new generation are more evolved, they are more exposed, and that they've seen that opportunity. I think the most important thing is that we are seeing more Africans getting into the industry. And the main challenge with that mindset was the fact that there was not so many of us, and our parents only saw this as some far-fetched thing, and they were not heard of. The pilots were not heard of in our community. Growing up, I never heard of a pilot. I never met a pilot, until I decided to go to flying school. That was actually my first time to meet a pilot, firsthand. Yeah, So the challenge really evolves from that kind of history. But I think I'd like to think that is changing. I think the most important thing is that we present the successful figures, African figures, who are doing well in this field, and they're making something of themselves, and they are as successful as the successful doctors, or even more successful, than the engineers and everyone. And to help that mindset change is really about visibly putting that forward and projecting this success story. I think that's what's important.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much for that comprehensive explanation. It really really brings a lot of things forward, that it's all about the exposure that one has, because growing up, we see a lot of teachers, we see a lot of nurses, we see one or two doctors. So as a result, we're all funneled to nurses and doctors and teachers, rather than all the other possibilities that one could have. Even as you're saying, going into space, not a lot of children right now growing up in some villages in Africa, or even towns, have that thought of, I could go to space one day. So that's interesting. But moving forward a bit, there's a clear gap between leading airlines in Europe, America, Australia, and leading airlines in Africa. How do we bridge that gap? Is this a time that we can look at and say, for example, a lot of airlines are now parking the Airbus A380. A lot of airlines are now parking the 747. Is this a time that Africa can look at and say, we can get those planes cut price and bring them over to our airspace and work from there? How do we bridge that gap?
I don't think it's as simple as that. I think, in fact, our challenge is not that we cannot access these aircraft that you're talking about, because we actually do fly the same aircraft that the same companies in Europe and the United States fly, the successful companies in this world. But I must say, we do have one or two, shining examples in Africa of airlines that are operating at a global level. In terms of success, in terms of their network, in terms of their size and scale. If you look at Ethiopian Airlines, that is a truly world-class airline, and it can compete with European legacy airlines and airlines in the United States. So the gap really is the gap between an airline such as Ethiopian and the rest of the airlines in Africa. Because I think the gap is very huge. One of the biggest problems we have in Africa is that we have a very fragmented aviation market. So we have so many small little airlines. What has happened in Europe and the United States is that you have about 5, 6 really huge airlines. In Europe, there's the big 5, and the United States, there's the big 5. And these airlines have all come about through consolidation. The airlines have kept merging, and other airlines have been acquiring smaller, weaker airlines, and airlines have been having mergers, over the years, and it is through that they've managed to achieve scale. And scale is extremely important for success in the aviation industry. It's only through scale that you can achieve certain, certain economic benefits. Economies of scale, are very, very important, and even Ethiopian Airlines enjoys that. So what we really need to do, and this is very important as well, because we really cannot compete. In fact, 80% of the traffic that comes continentally from Africa and out of Africa is carried by foreign airlines that are not African airlines. 80% of the traffic, we can't even carry the majority of our people out of our continent, which is extremely bad. We're not even competing on our own land, So we need to create huge world-class airlines, but that comes about from working together. We need to stop competing with each other and work together, in order to compete with the rest of the world. Most of our airlines are pitting themselves against each other, and they're very small. Yeah. Look, for example, East Africa, every single country in East Africa has an airline. They're all determined to dominate the region. How big is the market in East Africa? Is it big enough for all of them to be enormously successful and world class? It's not big enough. The only true benefits are from working together. Ethiopian Airlines has a model that perhaps can also be borrowed from. They do have a franchise model now, which is their model of growth. And they own stakes in various airlines across Africa. Ethiopian Airlines owns a stake in Malawian, which is a troubled airline right now. Zambian as well, which is troubled. Ethiopia and Mozambique. Actually, most airlines are troubled right now as a result of COVID. And Sky, various airlines around Africa. And they've managed to grow like that as well. Yeah, but our airlines need to come together. We need to draw the old school thinking around the flag carrier. We do not lose our identity by having a joint airline, between, say, 3, 4, 5 countries or whatever. You don't lose your identity. In fact, in Europe, we have airline groups. And perhaps we need to look at that. Airline groups where the countries still maintain their flag carrier status. If you look at the IAG, the International Airlines Group, it's made up of the likes of British Airways, Iberia, which was Spain's national carrier, and there's so many others. Most of these, Air France KLM is a collaboration between France, and the Netherlands. And they've not lost that status, but they're working together as one airline group. So we need to be able to do that. I think without care, we really cannot compete with the global airline. We need to grow, but obviously our challenges go beyond the macroeconomics of things as well. We are plagued by our own issues on the African continent, and they're both economic and political. I think we're not helping ourselves in terms of the policies that are meant to drive the aviation industry in Africa. I can tell you some of the main reasons that affect African aviation generally. And I'll go back to a study. There's a study that was done quite a number of years ago, over 5 years ago, commissioned by the Africa Development Bank to figure out what are the main challenges that are facing African aviation. And some of the things that came to the fore were lack of access to adequate finance. We do not have access to finance because in order to grow, you have to be well capitalized. And our countries are poor. They're not wealthy enough to support huge national airlines and to keep bailing out these national airlines, even if they do. And the reasons they have to bail them out are actually different because they are also poorly run, which is another problem, And another issue that we need to address is market access. Our airlines can't access the markets that they need in order to grow. And why is that? That comes down to policy. And these are politically driven policies of protectionism. It's very difficult for certain airlines to tap into certain markets, into certain countries, because they cannot. Growth in Africa is dictated by bilateral air service agreements. So you will have to go and negotiate with the specific country in order to access the market. This is a process that can take months. It might never even happen sometimes, So, so you don't have that flexibility to say, oh, the South African market looks like it's growing really quickly, or in this season, things are changing really quickly, and maybe let's extend our route network for this season to this and this and this place, because you cannot react to fast enough to access certain markets when you have to go through a bilateral process in order to get an air service agreement. So we need to be able to open up our skies, and create that freedom for any airline to access any market, So we need that framework, which exists in Europe, it exists in the United States as well. the liberalization of their services. In Europe, it happened through the 90s. And when that happened, it gave rise to this new model of air transport that is the low-cost carriers. That's when they came about in Europe. Yeah. Ryanair, EasyJet, airlines that can now offer passengers ridiculously low prices of tickets, because they can access, you can handpick your route, and you can select your point-to-point route, based on what works for you, what works for your model, and airlines were able to achieve unprecedented low, operational cost levels. And another issue that needs to be addressed in Africa is the issue of high taxes and levies. We have ridiculously high taxes. Yeah, and this is what affects the price of the airline ticket in Africa as well. Ticket prices are ridiculously high. Our government look at aviation as a tax cow. They do not understand the importance of this industry, to the economy, and the importance of creating an environment that can enable this industry to thrive. They instead look at it as an opportunity, to squeeze money out of the airlines, to squeeze money out of, the air transport industry generally. So because of that, these taxes are passed on to the passengers, and the passengers now have to pay very high prices. The cost of air travel in Africa is ridiculous. We are in a continent that is the poorest in the world. We have the least money to spend as people, but in order for us to move around, from one place to another with our airlines, we have to pay more, than the wealthier nations in the world, which is really self-defeating. So how does the industry grow? So we need to change. We need to look at the tax regime in Africa as well, and address that. So we have a lot of issues that we need to address generally as a continent in order to take our industry to the next level. Yeah, but those are just some of them.
No, I love how you sort of came full circle with that, because you speak of privatization, market share, and then you speak of the high taxes, because essentially the market share is so small at the moment because of the ridiculously high prices. Then how do you grow your market share if the prices are so high? I just love how you came full circle with that. Yeah. And to put it into context, with Ryanair, you can get a ticket for £12, which is roughly, you're looking at about 250 rands, which I can fly from here to Spain, a 2-hour flight for 250 rand.
Yeah. Of course, it's amazing. And of course. And it's impossible for us to have low-cost airlines in Africa because of the aforementioned reasons. Like you cannot come with a low-cost model in Africa and think that you're going to make it work. Because in order for you to lower your prices, you have to be able to lower your operational costs. In Africa, you can't lower your operational costs to a certain degree because there's nothing you can do about the taxes and levies. So for you to lower your ticket and compete on price is you just killing yourself. It's not sustainable in Africa, unfortunately.
Precisely. You also look at how BA has survived as a model. British Airways survived on that privatization, where they decided, realized that they're not going to be sustainable, fully funded by the government. So they had to privatize the whole thing. I don't know now if it's wholly privatized, but they had to let go of it as a government because it's the same situation. I'm more of a train man myself. I'm more into trains somehow. But it's the same situation with trains. They realized we need to let go of trains because we can't keep bailing them out. And I think South African Airways went through a similar problem a year ago or so, where the government has to keep pumping more money into it, and the money is poorly being distributed, so that doesn't really help at all. Now, I did mention earlier on about how go on.
No, I was just saying bailouts, it's not history, it's what continues to happen today in African aviation. That is what is going on. Just a couple of weeks ago, Air Malawi was bailed out. Before that, it was Kenya Airways and Air Tanzania, and everyone needs to be bailed out. Of course, at the moment, there is the context of COVID-19 that has obliterated the bottom line for most airlines. But most airlines in Africa who have been losing money for so many years, it's really just a convenient excuse as well.
Yeah.
So it's a culture on the African continent which we really need to get ourselves out of, and I think it's about time for government as well to realize that they cannot afford to prop up some of these airlines because it's extremely expensive.
Precisely. Now, we also speak of COVID. I'm glad you brought that up because this is where I was sort of heading to. That also did mention that even the major airlines have decided to park the Airbus A380, the Boeing 747, Queen of the Skies has been parked up. How is COVID affecting the African continent? And how can the African continent survive beyond COVID when it comes to aviation, specifically the airline aspect of aviation within the continent and the other facets that bring together the whole aviation industry?
Yeah, COVID has been bad for us, and we are no different from the rest of the world. I think the COVID issue is really a global issue, not just an African issue, but Africa is obviously compounded by the fact that we were already in a deep hole financially and economically. So for this to come about is just to really dig up a bit deeper. And for airlines that were already struggling in Africa, for COVID to come around, it's the final nail in the coffin, really, of so many airlines. Yeah. And for those whom it wasn't, they've simply been lucky to have governments that are willing to offer the necessary financial aid. And the financial aid has come in very many forms in Africa as well. Africa Development Bank did dedicate a certain amount of money to help the transport industry in Africa to recover. I don't know how well that has been distributed. That's a whole different question, or issue. Yeah, but generally, the industry has suffered, and we're still suffering because this pandemic persists. And travel is still at a seriously low level. Demand is still very low compared to pre-pandemic levels. And it's unfortunate because that demand as well is very unpredictable and recovery is uncertain because we keep coming up, we keep getting all these different waves of the virus coming up. So you really don't know when you're going to, when you see the light at the end of the tunnel, then something else comes up. So these are very grim times for the aviation industry, and African aviation is struggling, but there've been lessons to learn through this COVID pandemic. And the lessons have really been centered around how we do business, as African aviation, as airlines, as airports, and and I can borrow an example from say generally like stores. For example, we have stores say in South Africa that were affected and had to go down, say a clothing store, and you find another store that sells both clothes and food, that has managed to stay alive because one aspect of the business was affected more than the other, but the other aspect of the business was able to keep it afloat. So the same thing is happening in the airline industry and in aviation. I can tell you with airports are usually focused on passenger-based revenues, and the lesson has been to evolve and to diversify to non-passenger revenues as well, which have not been a focus for airports around the world even, but especially in Africa, non-aeronautical revenues need to be a thing. Airports are a huge infrastructure project. It's not just a runway and a terminal. There's so much more you can invest in the ecosystem around the airports. And, the airports that own hotels and shopping malls, and and it's all owned by the airport company as well. So I think these are some of the lessons. But when it comes to African airlines, the biggest lesson has been the importance of cargo, the cargo market, which incidentally has instead grown, through the pandemic. Cargo is at a higher level of demand than before the pandemic. And our behaviors as well changed as well. E-commerce grew through the pandemic, and that demand as well has been fueled by that. And our airlines have had to learn that, the cargo business is something that can not just help, but, push the airline to the next level. And we saw that with Ethiopian Airlines, which had the biggest cargo operation in Africa. But despite that, saw the pandemic as an opportunity. They had the foresight to see that cargo might be what will hold them together, and they converted aircraft. They converted about 25 aircraft passenger into cargo aircraft, on top of the already existing fighters, and Ethiopian Airlines is one of the airlines that did not have to go back to their government to ask for money. And so it's also about having the kind of model where you're flexible enough to be able to make those decisions and to flip and change and say, this is what's going on now. We need to convert our passenger aircraft. We need to convert this. We need to grow our cargo operation, and to be able to do it efficiently. To be able to do it quickly, and to adapt really quickly. And that's what Ethiopian Airlines had through this season. And the airlines with significant cargo operations have really done well, but generally, the African aviation industry, the countries with huge domestic markets have fared better than others for obvious reasons, because most of the restrictions are around cross-border travel. And so at least the domestic market has some form of activity. So that helps. There's not too many of those, though. But that's a COVID issue.
No, I'm glad that you also mentioned cargo there, because some people, when it comes to airlines, the only thing they ever envision is their president getting onto a flight. That's the only thing they think of when it comes to. They never think that, this could be used for cargo. So I'm glad you mentioned that.
Cargo is the less glamorous brother of passenger air transport, but can be very, very rewarding.
It can be a very lucrative part of aviation. Just to round it off. So what next for Derek? Just as we round up, what next for Derek? Are we seeing the next Elon Musk? Are you going to space anytime soon? Are you going to try and push for change within aviation in Africa? What next for Derek?
Well, I'll continue advocating, which is a huge part of my work, which is advocacy for some of these policy initiatives that are important for transformation of our industry, because I do want to be a part of that process of change that is going to push us forward. And I definitely want to grow my media platform, and I intend to build the biggest media platform on the African continent. And I know I'll realize that sooner or later, but Derek as a person, space is definitely going to happen. It's a matter of time. I think you're closer to Richard Branson there. You could just slide me his email.
We'll make it happen.
But mine is to be an integral part of the growth of African aviation. That's where my passion lies.
Brilliant. No, thank you ever so much for this. If you don't mind just giving us your Twitter handle, your Twitter handle for your personal one if you want, or the one for Airspace Africa, or any other work that you do, or any social media handles where people can get in touch that are listening. The rest I'll drop into the description box below.
Airspace Africa, straightforward. All the media handles are Airspace Africa, actually. Personal ones, Aviator Derek, AV8R _ the name Derek, DREK, for both Twitter and Instagram. Yeah, the rest, just a name, which you can find. Thank you so much, Brian.
No, brilliant. Thank you ever so much for joining us today.
Yeah.
We really appreciate this. Guys, his name is Derek. I'm Dudu Brian. This is Indawa, the African debate. And maybe the silver lining with COVID is that people might just get to work together in the aviation industry. Maybe that's just what we need.